As I was about to sit down at the dinner table, my stepfather's son knocked my plate to the floor and said, "Servants eat standing up." When I refused to clean it up, my stepfather lost his temper, grabbed a belt, and whipped me hard across the back. I fell to the ground, shards embedding straight into my hand. My mother didn't come near me. She only screamed louder, "Either obey or leave this house." I left with a broken arm, $2, and into the freezing winter night. But what they didn't know was that I would go on to build something they could never imagine. 4 years later. Where are you watching this from? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe so I can tell you the whole truth. My name is Stephanie, 21 years old, living in a small town on the outskirts of Boston. I still remember the day my mother left my father. I was only 7. She said she couldn't go on living with a man who was always absent, forever serving in the military in the Middle East. I didn't cry, but something inside me shattered. 6 months later, Mom remarried Frank, a polite insurance salesman who spoke softly and had a son of his own named Brock, 4 years younger than me. At first, Frank wasn't scary. Sometimes he'd buy me and Brock toys whenever he landed a new contract. Mine were always cheaper than Brock's, but I was still grateful. I used to think, at least he notices me. But everything changed when Frank got fired for deceiving clients. He started drinking, became irritable, and I slowly learned to keep my distance from him. When I was 12, in the cramped kitchen reeking of burnt coffee, I was setting the breakfast table with old plastic plates. Brock asked for orange juice, then deliberately spilled his cereal bowl onto the floor, giggling as I bent down to pick it up. My mother, Linda, kept her eyes glued to her phone, not saying a word. When I refused to keep serving Brock, Frank shouted that I was useless and ordered me to always put Brock first. I didn't dare argue, just stayed silent. When I was 15, Frank made me wash the car under the scorching noon sun while Brock played video games and mockingly called me the car wash girl. My mother heard it all but didn't step in. I started to feel like an invisible object in the very house I lived in. By the time I was 17, everything exploded. That evening, I made dinner as usual, but when I went to sit down, Brock blocked me and said, "Servants eat standing up." I looked at him, then quietly took a seat. Brock knocked my plate of food to the floor. When I refused to clean it up, Frank lost it, grabbed his belt, and struck me hard across my back and shoulders. The blow made me stumble and fall, my right hand landing right where the porcelain plate had shattered. A small shard sliced into my skin. Not deep, but it burned and bled bright red. I bit my lip, not daring to make a sound. Linda didn't come close, she just shouted louder, "Either obey or get out of this house." And I was shoved out the front door into the stormy winter night, clutching my aching arm and a pain colder than the rain slapping my face. My mother tossed me an old coat and locked the door. Not a glance, not a goodbye, as if I had never existed in that family. That night, I stood in the rain, trembling in the tattered coat my mother had just thrown out. I had exactly $2 crumpled in my pocket and a bleeding wound in the palm of my right hand. With nowhere to go, I walked along the muddy road leading out of the neighborhood, each step feeling like I was trampling the shame I'd just swallowed. I didn't cry, maybe because the rain had soaked my face, or maybe because I had long since learned to swallow tears. I made my way to a small park a few blocks away, where a big oak tree used to shade me when I was little. I sat down under that tree, trying to curl up, shielding myself from the cold wind and the rain that lashed at my neck. I hugged my knees, the bruises on my shoulder and arms starting to ache, but what choked me most was the terrifying silence, as if the whole world agreed that I deserved to be thrown out of the house I'd lived in for 10 years. I reached into my coat pocket. The old compact camera I'd hidden for months was still there. It was the only thing I considered truly mine, the place I recorded the unseen, the shattered lives no one ever asked about. I picked it up, wiped the lens with my sleeve, and looked around the empty park. The streetlights blurred like a distant memory. In the wind whistling through the oak, I whispered a sentence only I could hear. I still exist, not erased. No one was beside me that night, but a part of me, small, as tiny as a flicker at the end of a tunnel, began to wake up, whispering that I wouldn't let myself disappear, no matter how hard they tried. I left the park when the rain started pouring harder, not dry enough to sleep, not cold enough to pass out. I walked down the main street toward the town center, hoping to find a porch to shelter under. Finally, I stopped in front of a closed donut shop, its small tin awning just wide enough to cover someone curled up. I leaned against the wall, pulled my hood up to hide my face, still clutching my camera, as if letting go would make me vanish. A group of teenagers in hoodies and thin jackets walked past, the sound of their sneakers hitting the wet pavement clicking through the night. One of them stopped, looked at me, then sneered. "Hey, we got a homeless girl here?" Before I could react, a soda can came flying, hit my leg, bounced off, and rolled into a dirty puddle. Their laughter echoed in the night like cold slashes against my damp skin. I said nothing, didn't cry. I just bent down, picked up the can, and threw it into a nearby trash bin, a strange reflex as if I still needed to hold on to something for myself, even if it was just the last bit of civility. I left the awning, kept walking, past an abandoned movie theater where the neon lights had long gone dark, the torn movie posters fluttering in the wind. I passed a locked old church where a Christmas concert once took place when I was 10. Now, even God seemed to have left this town. Boston's night was pitch black, the road ahead stretched like a colorless ribbon, and I had nothing but aching feet and a feeling in my chest slowly turning to stone. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew going back was no longer an option. Every trace of me in that family was likely erased, from the last meal to the sound of the door slamming behind me. I walked into a 24-hour convenience store. The harsh white fluorescent light beaming straight into my eyes made me squint, but it also pulled me back from the numbness creeping up my neck. I dug into my pocket, pulled out the crumpled $2 bill, and bought a pre-wrapped hamburger, the cheapest thing still warm enough. The cashier didn't ask anything, just glanced at me like he was counting how many steps I'd take before the cops had to be called. I took the hamburger and went into the restroom at the end of the aisle, where a fogged-up mirror clung with moisture. I hadn't meant to look, but my eyes found the mirror anyway. And in that moment, I saw myself. Pale face, a visible bruise spreading under my left cheek, right shoulder stiff, unable to lift above my head, and my wrist red and raw with a long cut from the shard. I stood there for a long while, unblinking, like staring at a stranger. I tried raising my left hand to wash my face, but even that movement sent a pain so sharp it stabbed into my bones. I might have dislocated something when I hit the floor. I wondered, if I were a stranger, looking at me now, what would I think? A homeless girl? A pitiful one? A brat thrown out for being disobedient? I looked deeper into the mirror, and in that moment, I whispered, "This is what they think of me." Then I walked out, without looking back, took a small bite of the cold hamburger, and sat on the bench near the bus stop a few meters away. The sky was still drizzling, the posters on the bus shelter flapping in the wind, an old advertisement for a winter tour, white snow, happy smiles. I looked at that poster and felt like I was standing on the edge of a world everyone else had left long ago. Morning light began to creep in as I still sat on the cold bench near the bus stop, my eyes stinging from exhaustion and rain. More people started passing by, hurried footsteps, no one stopping. Just when I thought I'd stay here, until hunger made me faint. The scent of grilled meat and fried cornmeal floated in the air, a strange smell against the damp sky and wet streets. I turned my head and saw a small taco cart near the corner, its canvas awning dark with moisture, warmed by a gas lamp inside. The woman selling tacos was in her 50s, broad-shouldered, wearing a deep red wool scarf, wiping down the metal counter with a damp cloth. She looked at me for a moment, then gestured, "Come here." I hesitated, but my feet moved before I could decide. I approached, standing across from the cart, the smell of grilled corn and cilantro making my stomach clench. She didn't ask if I had money. She just scooped 2 small tacos onto a paper plate, then handed them over with a neatly folded, well-washed handkerchief. "Eat. Wipe your face first." I didn't know what to say, just took them, my hands trembling. She sat down on the nearby bench, patted the space beside her. "My name's Rosa. I used to sleep under a bridge in El Paso when I first came to America, went hungry some days, got rocks thrown at me just for being an immigrant." Her voice was low and steady, not pitying, just storytelling, as if the past were another ingredient in this warm taco. I ate, slowly, to stretch out the warmth in each bite. "You have strong eyes," she said after a few minutes of silence. "Don't let them take that. When I was your age, someone once told me, if you make it through the night, you deserve to be heard. I believed it, and I think you do too." I bowed my head, not daring to cry. Rosa didn't need to know who I was, but she did what no one in my family ever had. She sat beside me, looked at me in silence, and believed I still had worth. That afternoon, after parting ways with Rosa, a volunteer guided me to an emergency support center for homeless youth in Boston. It was a 3-story brick building with a small porch lined with plastic flower pots and a faded blue sign. When I walked in, the air smelled of tomato soup and antiseptic. A small single room, a twin bed, a thin gray blanket. I exhaled, for the first time feeling like I wouldn't have to sleep in the rain. Dinner that night was reheated pasta and dry cookies, but I ate every bite, like my stomach had just been forgiven. As I was folding the blanket, a staff member entered. Her name was Clara, hair tied low, no makeup, but with eyes that saw everything. Clara sat beside me, holding a thin folder, and started with a sentence I never thought I'd hear. "We just received a report from your family." I froze. Clara opened the folder, read slowly. "Your stepfather, Frank, filed a report stating that you threatened the family with a kitchen knife. They claim you're violent and a potential danger." My body locked up, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "That's not true," I said immediately. "I just refused to clean up after Brock spilled the plate. I didn't threaten anyone." Clara didn't react, just nodded slightly, made a note on another sheet of paper. But I nearly wanted to scream, not because I was misunderstood, but because my own family had written those words, in black and white. They didn't just throw me out, they wanted to legally erase me from their lives. I looked down at my hands, one still bandaged with Rosa's cloth, the other shaking with rage. While I was trying to survive hour by hour, somewhere out there, they were constructing a different version of me, Stephanie, unstable, dangerous, needing to be isolated. And with every word they sent to the police, I began to understand. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased. The next morning, Clara returned. She brought an official copy of the police report, clipped inside a brown folder with the title, "Juvenile Violent Behavior Assessment Case," printed on the front. Clara didn't say anything, just placed the file on the table and let me read it. I opened it, each page rustling with a metallic chill. The report described me in alien terms, displays extreme defiance, threatened with a sharp object, history of disobedience and unstable attitude. Below each description were notes from the family, as if they were writing about a child they'd never raised, never touched a fevered forehead for, never held during a storm. I slowed down when I reached the end, the section for guardian signatures. The first line read Frank's name, in messy block letters, like a handwritten complaint. The second was Linda, my mother's name, written in blue ink with a loop on the first L that I remembered clearly. She used to sign that way in my school report book when I was in first grade. But something else had changed. She didn't sign with my old last name. Beneath the signature, she wrote her new full name, Linda Salgado. She had dropped my father's last name. And dropped mine. I stared at that line as if it would disappear if I focused hard enough. But it didn't blur. It only became sharper. My mother didn't just sign me out of her home. She signed into a new life, one where I didn't exist, didn't connect, didn't share blood. Clara placed her hand lightly on the table's edge and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I just quietly folded the file closed, holding it tight like a thin coffin. That evening, Clara took me to meet someone she believed could help, a freelance journalist named Gianna, around 50, with streaks of gray hair tied up high, a long khaki coat, and a voice low and steady like wood. Gianna used to work for a major magazine but now operated independently, telling stories of the forgotten on a small YouTube channel. No ads, only truth. When I stepped into the small room where Gianna had set up a makeshift recording studio, a repurposed meeting room in the local library, I nearly turned around and left. But her gaze wasn't probing, nor was it pitying. It was simply waiting. "What do you want to share?" she asked without a notebook, without reaching for a recorder. I sat down, still clutching my old camera inside my coat pocket. A long silence. Then I spoke. My voice was hoarse at first, broken, but sentence by sentence, image by image, from the spilled breakfast to Frank's belt, to the coat my mother threw out, to the donut shop awning, the blood on my hand, and the blue ink signature. Each fragment came into focus like slides flicking through my mind. Gianna didn't interrupt. Only when I finished did she ask gently, "What do you want to call this story?" I paused for a moment, then said, "This is how they erase a daughter." Gianna nodded, turned on the camera. She told me just to recount what I had said. No need to look into the lens. I did. And for the first time in years, I didn't whisper. I spoke, with a voice that still trembled but was clear. I said I didn't run away. I was pushed out. I said I didn't leave because I was disrespectful. I left because I was hurt. I said, "They can't rewrite me with words on a report. I'm still here. I still have a name. I still have a voice." When I finished, Gianna didn't offer comfort nor praise. She just turned off the camera, closed her laptop, and said something I'll never forget. "You no longer need them to validate your existence. Now it's your turn to speak." And that night, I stepped outside. The rain was still falling lightly, but for the first time, I didn't lower my head. A few days after the interview, Gianna came to the support center looking for me. She brought a small bag of pastries and a piece of paper with the address of a photography studio tucked deep in Boston's Old Quarter. "I want you to meet someone," she said. "He doesn't heal with words, but with light." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I agreed to go. Light and Shadow Studio was tucked inside an old brick building, its large glass windows coated with aging white paint. Inside, the air smelled of photochemicals, coffee, and damp wood, with soft light from the windows casting down on the dark wooden floorboards. Marcus, a seasoned photographer in his early 60s, sleeves rolled high on his worn shirt, tousled silver hair, was gently wiping a lens with a soft cloth. He didn't ask where I came from, nor why I was there. He looked at me for a few seconds, then opened a wooden drawer and pulled out an old film camera. "Ever taken photos before?" he asked. I nodded faintly, pulling from my coat pocket the compact camera. The only thing I'd carried from the night I was thrown out. Marcus smiled, unsurprised. "Then try this. But this time, shoot in black and white. No colors, no tricks, just light, shadow, and the story you see inside it." I took the camera, slightly trembling. He handed me a preloaded film roll and added, "It doesn't have to be beautiful, just real." I left the studio, walked to the park, the one where I once took shelter under the oak, and lifted the camera for the first time with a new feeling. No longer a fugitive, I was now documenting the place where I had existed. I clicked the shutter as the streetlight reflected in a puddle of rainwater, the same spot where laughter had echoed, and a soda can struck my leg. When the film was developed, Marcus looked at the first photo I took, placed it on the light table. He didn't say much, just nodded and slowly said, "Your photo has soul. It tells a story without needing words." I sat quietly, looking at the print. A blurred corner of the rain-soaked park, the yellow light stretching like a fragile thread, tethering me to the world. I etched a small phrase into the frame. The words that had saved me that first night I was cast out. Still existing. A few days later, Marcus called me back to the studio. He was dusting the work table near the darkroom, then pointed to that corner and said, "If you want, this can be your space. I need an assistant. Organize film, clean lenses, tidy the darkroom. The pay's not much, but enough for 3 meals and a new roll of film." I stood silent for a few seconds, then nodded, not for the money, but because, for the first time in my life, someone asked me to stay. Without conditions of obedience, not out of desperation, but because they believed I could do something. The Light and Shadow studio became a quiet refuge. Each morning, I cleaned the table, rearranged the frames Marcus had taken over decades, nameless people, old street corners, light streaming through a bookstore window. I learned how to develop photos, work with chemicals, log film numbers, and more importantly, I began shooting regularly. Not to prove anything, but to record the moments I once didn't dare face. I photographed a homeless man asleep on a park bench, arms wrapped tightly around an empty plastic bag. I captured sunlight sneaking through the cracked window of an abandoned diner. I caught a little girl waiting for her mother outside a laundromat, clutching an old stuffed rabbit. The photos weren't necessarily beautiful, but in each frame was a stillness, as if everything, broken, misplaced, still had a reason to exist. Marcus didn't praise much, just laid each photo on the light table and let me see for myself. And I began to see more clearly, not just the details in the photos, but the parts of me once hidden beneath fear and silence. The city remained noisy, full of car horns, passers-by, lives spinning on. But inside this small studio, everything slowed down, and I was allowed not to be strong right away. I only had to be real. And I was relearning that, through the lens, through each frame of film, and through myself. I was cleaning the third lens of the day when the studio's glass door flew open with a harsh ring of the wind chime. Frank. Still that same look, half mocking, half irritated, as if he had every right to step into any space I occupied. He stood in the middle of the room wearing a wide black coat, eyes scanning as if to judge everything, the framed photos on the wall, the light, my existence. "Thought you'd disappeared," he snorted, voice dripping with contempt. "What are you doing? Playing artist? Making up stories online to slander the family?" I stood upright, didn't move closer, didn't look away. My heart pounded in my chest, but my voice was eerily calm. "I didn't make anything up. I just told the truth. If that scares you, maybe it's because people are finally hearing it." Frank stepped forward, pointed a finger at my face. "You're making yourself out to be some victim for pity. You're a traitor. Your mother regrets it. And me. I'll sue you if you mention my name online again." Before I could reply, Marcus stepped out of the darkroom. He didn't raise his voice, but each word hit like a stone. "This is a photo studio. A place for healing. We don't accept toxicity here. Leave." Frank chuckled coldly, stepped back a few paces, but didn't let go. "You think these pictures will save you? They're just fragments. No one cares." I looked at him for a long moment, then slowly raised my camera. Clicked the shutter. No flash. No warning. Frank flinched. "What the hell did you just do?" I lowered the camera, replied quietly. "Took your picture. Not your face. Your shadow, just now, on the floor. Distorted. Frank looked down, saw his shadow stretched across the wooden floor, swallowed by the light, no longer a defined shape. He stood silent for a few seconds, then turned, pushed open the door, the wind chime clanging sharper than ever. I sat back down, hands still holding the camera tight. Marcus placed his hand gently on my shoulder, then said, "That's real power. Not because you shouted, because you're no longer afraid." I nodded, looking at the trembling shadow still stretching on the wooden floor. In the frame it would stay there. No more yelling, no more power, just a warped outline, exposed. A week after the confrontation with Frank, Gianna came to the studio on a chilly afternoon, holding an invitation printed on recycled paper, the handwriting neat and precise. Community photo exhibition, frames that speak what no one says. The event would be held at an old bookstore in South Boston, a place, as Gianna put it, where everyone who's survived deserves to walk in at least once. I hesitated. Marcus looked at me, asked only one question. "How long do you want your story to stay silent?" I nodded, unsure whether from readiness or fear of losing the moment if I didn't step forward. That night, I wore a simple brown sweater, walked from the train station to the bookstore, where yellow light from the fireplace in the corner glowed onto the wooden ceiling, where stacks of old books became seats and photos were hung along the walls with thin rope. No one asked who I was. No one asked what school I'd gone to or where I was from. They just smiled, reached out a hand. "Please, join us." I sat in the corner, listening to strangers tell their stories through photos. Someone captured strands of hair lost during chemotherapy, someone a father's silhouette who had passed, someone else displayed only a blank photo, and said, "This is how I felt at 16, when my whole family left without a word." Each story was a gentle stitch in the unfinished wound inside me. I didn't share anything that night, but I felt heard, even in silence. The light from the fireplace, the smell of old books, the soft footsteps on wood, everything so tender, it made me believe, maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to belong somewhere. Not as a guest, but as part of a quiet conversation so many have never had the chance to begin. The night of the exhibition continued, each person sharing their story through photos, poems, or just a brief glance toward the wall. I still sat quietly, resting a printed photo in my lap. The park, where I once sat in the rain, the soft yellow glow of the streetlight reflected in a puddle. At first, I didn't plan to speak, but then a woman in her 40s stood up, voice light like the first winter wind. She spoke of surviving domestic violence, of 10 years in silence, and how she learned photography to remind herself she still existed. When she sat down, the room fell into silence. Not awkward, but the kind of understanding that needs no words. I stood, unsure why. Maybe because of her story. Maybe because I knew if I didn't speak now, I'd stay silent for years more. I stepped forward, holding my simple photo. No technique, no sharpness, just a corner of a park, rain, and light. I lifted the photo and said, "I wasn't planning to share tonight, but I took this picture on a night I was thrown out of my home." I sat there in the rain with $2 and a torn coat. No one saw me. No one asked if I was hungry. No one called my name. And I thought, maybe I was fading away, like a photo never developed. I paused, looked down at the photo, then continued. But the streetlight's reflection in the puddle, it didn't disappear. Whether someone looked or not. And neither did I. I didn't disappear. I was just forgotten. The room stayed quiet, no applause, only a sensation spreading, like light slowly rising over an old wooden table. An older man, stern demeanor, silver hair, long coat, approached me afterward. He spoke softly. "I have a daughter. We haven't spoken in 15 years, but after hearing you, I think I should call her." Then he turned away, slowly, but no longer silently. Gianna stood behind me, placed in my hand a small black-covered notebook, a photojournal of storytellers. "Write it all down," she said. "Every piece, every light, every day you weren't erased." And I knew a new chapter was waiting ahead. One no longer beginning with pain, but with the first frame of true recovery. That afternoon, I was arranging final prints for the upcoming exhibition when the studio door opened softly. No bell, no gust of wind, just the faint sound of footsteps and shallow breathing. I looked up and froze. Linda, my mother. She wore an old beige coat, hair tied back, eyes shadowed but trying to maintain composure. In her hand was a small paper bag, the kind people bring when offering homemade apologies after an argument. I said nothing. Marcus looked at me, waiting for a nod, then quietly withdrew into the dark room, leaving the space to me. Linda stepped a few paces inside, then stopped in the middle of the room, her voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to ask if you're okay." I looked at her. Part of me wanted to laugh at that question, but I only replied, calmly, "I'm okay now, not because of you." She blinked, lips pressed tight, then hurried on. "I didn't come to justify anything, but you made everyone see me as a mother who abandoned her child. You told a story that turned people against the family." I nodded slowly. "Because it's the truth." Linda tightened her grip on the bag, her face reddening, then exhaled. "Frank wasn't good. I know that, but back then I didn't know what to do. I was scared, tired, and I thought you'd get used to it. You were strong." I stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "Did you know Frank called me useless when I was 12? Did you know he hit me with a belt in front of you? Do you remember that rainy night when you tossed me a coat and shut the door?" Linda turned away, eyes wet, unable to speak. I took a deep breath, then spoke slowly, clearly. "You didn't come here to save me. You came because you're afraid of being seen for who you really were, but this is not the place where you get to rewrite the story." Linda looked at me, no longer resistant. Just a woman who had lost her daughter years ago, now standing in the space where that daughter had been reborn. I didn't hate her, but I no longer begged for love either. I only needed her to know I had existed without her recognition. When Linda turned to leave, Marcus and Gianna stepped out. They said nothing but stood quietly behind me, not for a confrontation, but as witnesses to the moment when a once-abandoned child stood tall, looked straight ahead, and said, "I am the one rewriting this story." 3 months later, on a softly raining Boston afternoon, I was editing the final photo series for the exhibit when Marcus walked in, holding a cream-colored envelope damp with rain, bearing a slanted, familiar script. Linda Salgado. I sat down, hands trembling slightly as I held the letter. The smell of wet paper, rain, and the nervous anticipation of something long overdue. I opened it. My mother's handwriting was the same, firm but more fragile, as if each line had to scrape through the dust of time. "Stephanie, after you left, I had to do everything you once did: cook, clean, care for Brock. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop because of Frank. I lived like a ghost in my own house. I didn't write sooner because I was afraid of Frank, but he was arrested 2 weeks ago. Drunk, caused an accident, assaulted a young girl about your age. I watched the police cuff him, and for the first time, I could breathe. I just want you to know I see things more clearly now. I'm sorry. Can we meet? A week from now, I'll wait at the little cafe on 10th Street, Friday afternoon. You can come or not." I read it 3 times. I didn't cry, didn't collapse, just a long, quiet stillness inside. I looked toward the framed photo on the studio wall, under the streetlight, the one of the homeless man sleeping in the rain, the light reflecting in puddles like stars breaking apart. My hand tightened on the frame, and I knew I would go. Not to hear an apology, but to see if maybe a tiny piece of memory could be put back in its place. A week later, I stepped into the foggy window cafe, hazelnut and cinnamon in the air. Linda was already there, in the furthest corner. She looked thinner, her hair more gray, a dark bruise under her left eye. She bowed her head, said nothing. I pulled out a chair and sat, not touching the glass of water before me. After a moment, she looked up, her voice cracking. Frank hit me 3 weeks ago when I said I didn't want to obey anymore. I looked at the bruise, an image I'd once seen on my own face at 17. Linda clenched her hands, said, "He forced me to go to that exhibition. Thought you had a future? Thought he could ask for money. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. And I'm sorry for making you endure all of it." I looked at her for a long time. What she said couldn't erase the past, but I didn't need that. I only needed the truth. I reached out and held her hand, not tightly, not too softly. "If you truly want to change, then I'm still here." I wasn't angry anymore. I no longer needed her to be the ideal mother, but deep inside, a small part, left behind in the rain years ago, had been picked up. Not to reconnect, but to accept that I had survived. And if someone wants to walk beside me for a while, then walk. But don't ever push me out again. One misty Boston morning, Jana dropped by the studio as she often did. But this time, she brought peppermint tea and a bag of crisp butter cookies. I smiled softly, took the box, and invited her to the old leather chair in the corner. Gianna took a sip of tea, then looked at me through eyes that had seen hundreds of survival stories. "You went to see your mother, didn't you?" I nodded. No need for details. She understood. I told her about Frank's arrest, my mother's letter, how I sat down, not as a child needing an apology, but as a woman setting boundaries that had once been erased. Gianna placed her hand gently on mine, said, "You didn't just survive. You've learned to choose what's worth keeping." I told Gianna that I had forgiven, not the kind of forgiveness that makes things return to the way they were, but conditional forgiveness. If my mother truly wanted to leave Frank and start anew, I wouldn't stop her, and if she needed help, I'd be there. But I wouldn't let her enter my new life with the same old key that once locked me in silence. Gianna nodded, smiling. "And if she's serious, I'll refer her to one of the best divorce and property lawyers. Not for revenge, but to reclaim legal freedom. No one should be bound to a door that no longer opens toward light." I thanked her, then poured more tea. Outside, the rain fell steadily, like a wordless soundtrack. Marcus stepped out from the dark room, placing a freshly developed photo on the table. A little girl standing under a rainy awning, light reflecting on her face like a reminder. "You haven't been forgotten." I looked at the photo and saw myself, no longer the rain-soaked girl in the park at 17, but the one telling that story now through light and choice. 6 months later, my mother sent a short text. "Frank was sentenced to 3 years for the crash and assault. I filed for divorce." That was all. No exclamation marks. No begging for another chance. I read the message, then set the phone down. Not happy, not angry. Just light. Like a door inside me quietly clicked shut. Not locked, but no longer needing to reopen unless someone knocks with trust and kindness. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, a small loft in North Boston, white walls, bare wood floors, a window looking out over old, unused train tracks. The sun was setting, its golden light melting over tree branches, rooftops, the windows across the street, as if this city, too, was learning to soften after so many bruised seasons. I had just completed the final photo series for the project, a collection of portraits of the homeless street children and women once cast aside. Each photo held a story, no captions, no analysis, just eyes, hands, stains on shirts, or sunlight glinting through scratched glasses. I called the project Exist, not to prove anything, but because these people reminded me I was not alone. There are those who were once pushed out of this world, but still stood, like the streetlight from the night I took shelter in the rain, not flickering, not needing to be seen. Gianna had taken part of the series to exhibit in Seattle. A major journalist called asking for an interview, but I haven't responded. I don't need to prove anything else. I don't need to be honored, don't need my mother's approval, don't need Frank to admit guilt. All I need is a frame that fits in my hands, a moment that feels real, and a blink at the right time. Tonight, I'll pin up the newest photo on the studio wall, taken from an old awning where a young girl sits curled up on her first rainy night next to a discarded soda can. Her face isn't visible, only the light in her wet hair and a small handwritten line in white ink below the photo. She's still here, but now she's holding the camera. My story isn't the only one. Out there are many others like me, pushed out of their own homes, rewritten with lies, and still learning how to rise again from the same puddle. If you're listening to this story, thank you. You are not invisible. And if you want to help us continue telling journeys like these, stories of truth, of healing, of ordinary people who never gave up, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Not because they're weak, but because they deserve to see themselves in a story that was never meant to be hidden.